disrupted.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. There's a bit of a shakeup happening in the Canadian media landscape. There was a kerfuffle involving Bell Media. And for those who don't know a thing or two, and I'll just say on record that for those who are aware of Bell Canada, it's one of those companies, the corporation, that people have two different opinions. There's a lot to be said about this certain company and their practices and the way they handle things. And when you talk to ordinary Canadians about Bell Media and how they've had to deal with it, there's usually two reactions that come out of most Canadians. It's either they're okay with it, they're just fine, no, happy or bad. It's just, come see, come saw, or they're extremely aggravated. That's usually one of the two general outcomes when it comes to, dealing with Bell Canada. And from my personal experience, there's a lot to be said about Bell Canada. There's a lot, aggravation that I've dealt with over years, and they're kind of similar in a way, similar kind of experience as, Americans do with Comcast. For those who are aware of that and have read about, different employees that work for Comcast, you kind of get where this is going. But this is heartbreaking news because I know people in the industry. I went to school for this industry, and, you feel bad. You feel bad because of what's symbolic about this, but there's a lot of mixed emotions in result of this news. So, as Lisa LaFlamme points it, it's a painful and difficult day. Lisa LaFlamme speaks out about latest Bell Media layoffs. Now, of course, Lisa LaFlamme, as many people are aware, she is the predominant former news anchor, the head news anchor of CTV National News. She was laid off before all these cutbacks, before all the layoffs. She was fired by the network. They said, according to CTV, it was because of her hair color. That's what people were speculating. That was what they said on mainstream media. But we covered on this channel, we looked at the back and forth between Lisa LaFlamme and the network, and we know through personal conversation that LaFlamme wanted to do investigations on Ukraine. She wanted to actually go over to Kiev and see exactly our Canadian tax dollars in use. Where was it going towards? Where are we funding in this Ukraine war? CTV, however, did not agree with Lisa LaFlamme. She got slammed down by the network, and of course that led to eventually getting cut off from the network. So it's definitely a heartbreaking complexity of insanity that's coming from Bell Media and this company as a whole. There's a lot to be said about this. So it says former CTV News anchor Lisa LaFlamme has spoken out about the latest round of Bell Media layoffs. On Thursday, BCE Incorporated President and CEO Mirko Bibic announced in an open letter that 4,800 jobs, 9% of Bell Media's total workforce, will be cut, and that the company would sell 45 of its radio stations. Restructuring decisions are incredibly tough for all of us because it affects the people we work with and care about. We know these decisions are hardest on those leaving Bell, he wrote. So, of course, that's the corporate gobbledygook you hear all the time. You see it all the different times that they try to, humor the workforce that they're trying to lay off, or they're trying to move away, or saying that we're going to ship your jobs overseas. This is kind of the, cutback of, I'm going to make this a low blow. I'm going to try and humor you and say that I really care about you, but not enough to actually save your jobs. So you already kind of have an understanding of where this is going and how devastating this is. They're saying that this is because of financial decisions, but at the same time, Bell Media, much like Rogers, much like any of the big conglomerate corporations here in Canada, got subsidies through the government and was funneled all this money to protect the industry, to protect journalists. But of course, BCE and Rogers and these big corporations decided not to go with, investing into their workforce, investing into professional journalism. They decide to run with the money. They decided to go with the CEOs. They decided to give them benefits and outpay them, and also invest more in automated technology, which, as we know through COVID, a lot of these, broadcast jobs have been slowly dying off because when we were told to lock down, we were told, to stay home and shut everything down. A lot of these broadcasters said, hey, we can just do the same job through robots. And they decide, hey, we're just gonna ease off, actual human contact when it comes to broadcasting and just do everything kind of remotely. So there's a lot to be said about why this is happening. Could it be corruption? Could it be technology? Could it also be the fact that traditional journalism is kind of dying because of more independent broadcasters, because of YouTube shows and individual investigators that are providing more context? So there's a lot to be said about this, but it's sad regardless. Sources within the CTV newsroom confirmed with the Daily Hive that several key CTV national news reporters were affected by the Bell Media layoffs. CTV noon and weekend news shows in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver were also shut down as part of the shakeup. LaFlamme shared a post on X Thursday evening in solidarity with those who lost their jobs. She says that from BC's coastal mountains, I am thinking of my dear friends and former colleagues in this painful and difficult day in television news across the country, she wrote. So many suddenly out of work tonight. At these moments, home and family are a rock. And that's there. Canadians fled the veteran journalist X replies with similar sentiments. This comes less than a year after Bell Media's latest round of layoffs in June of 2023, slashing 1,300 jobs. That round of layoffs saw many well-known CTV national reporters and producers cut, including Glenn McGregor, Danielle Hamadjian, Dijon. Man, I apologize for mispronouncing these. Tom Walters and Rosa Juan, to name a few. It also comes close to 2 years after LaFlamme's sudden ousting from CTV National News. And this is also on top of another big, huge, sad report. And this is kind of a staple of CTV, the network itself, and CTV News, is that W5 was announced their cancellation. This is from Made in Canada. They post this. W5's been canceled. It debuted in 1966 and was the longest running current affairs news magazine in North America and Canada's third longest running television show ever. Hosts have included Sandy Ronaldo, Lloyd Robertson, and Morley Safer. It inspired other shows, including 60 Minutes. So, again, there's a lot to be said about this. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of different takes on why this is happening. What exactly is Bell's motive to this? Is this um, because they're being corrupted with their money? Are they not financially securing the journalism? Like, there's so many concepts to look into this. But the reason I want to cover this and why I feel this is kind of important, not only on the fact that it's symbolic on where television is going, but also the fact that this is kind of a part of my world. This is a part of, where, I have friends, I have people that are working in this industry that are getting laid off. I went to school for this. I feel part of this. And you feel devastated when you see, your career aspects or your goals, your inhibitions kind of pander off because of this. But, we have this show here. We have Kitz Corner on YouTube and Rumble and doing as much as we can to inform people and provide context and, you know, kind of comedic way. So I'm fortunate on that behalf, but I also feel sad about this. There's a lot of mixed emotions. There's a lot of mixed emotion. And especially the fact that W5, again, one of the longest running television news information pieces, one of these current affairs news magazines in North America. Like it's 1966, so 58 years this show has been on. Just cut in an instant. Like that's just it's kind of crazy. It's crazy to think that it could just go like that in the minute of a heartbeat. And no one really knows why. No one really knows what's exactly happening to this. Um, but like I said, Bell Media has their say in this. And people working at Bell Media have their say in this. And people that watch CTV News or W5 have different viewpoints on this. Everybody has their kind of own reaction to this situation. But I just want to point a few things out and just add to this conversation here. Because one of the things that we can mention, and something maybe to include in who's at fault for this, is the fact that we're seeing this is kind of symbolic in the fact that corporate media is again losing touch with its audience. Corporate media is fading away from the trust of its viewership. You look at back in the day when, traditional journalists would cover story and news was just about information. It was about just being this kind of voice and informing people. But you see now where corporate media took over, corporate media is now just kind of this infotainment. It's not really informative to people. It's more just try to get viewership and ratings and advertisement. Like that's all it really is. So this comes, and this is a report done by the Epoch Times. The 500-page report detailed how the COVID-19 response by the government was vastly irresponsible, unscientific, and against basic human rights. Canadian government and media colluded to instill fear, coerce citizens into taking vaccines, report. So that is something to also address in this. That's something to also in why Bell Media has kind of turned away and why Bell Media is on its last saving grace, because it lost so much respect. Corporate media in itself, it's already kind of declined beforehand. But when it came to COVID, when it came to the coverage of the Freedom Convoy, when it came to the censorship tactics to silence out people that were scientifically analyzing the virus, scientifically analyzing the vaccines, that's when people took notice, and that's when trust in the media uh fell down and decreased at a huge rate when people realized that they were being lied to and manipulated at a huge level in partnership with not only the Canadian government but Bell Media itself, and also the big pharmaceuticals that were supportive of this, that were funneling advertising money towards CTV, its radio stations, and all of its newspapers. They were funneling money to make sure that they weren't being investigated. The big pharmaceutical giants were out of the spotlight and instead pushing their propaganda, pushing their narrative, pushing their agenda to, to vilify people to get this vaccine, which I'll tell you, it's very safe and effective. But also, another point to mention was how the government has already treated media. Because we have seen from Bill C-11 to C-18 to C-19 to all these different means of censorship, how devastating it is, not only just for podcasters and independent journalists, but also the corporate media sphere. Because let's not forget, because of Justin Trudeau's ruling that broadcasters like CTV, CBC, Global News, all these different outlets cannot post on Facebook and Instagram. They were forced out through Meta. Now, the Canadian government puts the finger at Meta, but what I would say, because we covered this beforehand, is that both the faults, they are both at fault when it comes to this malice against the media, against, being able to share ideas and opinions. And it also fell suit to the fact that they lost viewership because of this, because people that are on social media, they can't share, this story, for example. They can't share articles from the CBC. They can't share articles from Global News and CTV and the Globe and Mail and National Post. So they're going to lose viewership. They're going to lose readers. They're going to lose people sharing that information. And that took a huge hit in the traditional media sphere, as much as independent broadcasters. So that is something to take note of when it comes to Bell Media laying off so many people in this second wave of purging themselves. And this brought attention to Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford, because this is a huge layoff. This is one of the biggest layoffs we've had this year so far. And this comes just shortly after Bell Media already laid off people, and they got setbacks through the government, again, to try to preserve media, but they ended up giving it to the CEOs. They didn't protect journalists. They didn't protect the workforce. So there's a lot to be said, and there should be a lot to be investigated on. But listen to what Justin Trudeau has to say about this, and Doug Ford, staying in the back looking like some sort of creepy bouncer at a edgy nightclub. Just that facial, that resting face is just absolutely gory. But here's how Justin Trudeau reacted when a reporter asked him about his thoughts on the Bell Media shakeup. Because let's not forget, this man is also responsible for the downward spiral of traditional media, because he was the one that was pushing the news networks and all these other corporations to fall into line. They have to play to our narrative, and they do investigate, they do peddle a different tone, or they do provide a different context, then they will be scrutinized. That's what they did with Rebel Media. That's what they're doing now with other independent journalists, and that's why they're increasing censorship tactics. But here's what Justin Trudeau said in this.
On the Bell Canada layoffs of 4,800 people across the country, your Heritage Minister accused Bell Canada of breaking its promise to invest in local news after receiving $40 million in regulatory relief funding. What is your view of that company's layoffs, and what is your commitment to future government support with that company?
I'm furious. This is a garbage decision by a corporation that should know better. We've seen over the past years journalistic outlets, radio stations, small community newspapers bought up by corporate entities who then lay off journalists, change the offering, the quality of offering to people. And then when people don't watch as much or engage as much, the corporate entity says, oh, see, they're not profitable anymore. We're going to sell them off. This is the erosion, not just of journalism, of quality local journalism, at a time where people need it more than ever, given misinformation and disinformation, but it's eroding our very democracy.
It's hard to take his answer seriously. And again, this is not in defense of Bell. This is not in defense of Bell Canada, because again, it's a company that definitely needs a lot of scrutiny. There's so many problematic areas in Bell to begin with, and just how horrible their practices are. But consider the fact that Justin Trudeau, notoriously went against journalists through measures of legislature and imposing these new restrictions when it comes to, providing information, not disinformation, censoring out critical key areas, and not allowing podcasters access. Look at what happened with Rebel Media when they took down a journalist and they arrested David Menzies on a political stunt. And while Justin Trudeau is saying this, trying to be, again, the hero of, free speech and how we need to have free press and free access, here he is being the headmaster of being lucrative when it comes to legislating that goes against journalists, that goes against, investigators, the local newsmakers. He is the one cultivating these tactics to go against journalists. So for him to say that, Bell Media is doing a garbage decision, which they are doing a garbage decision, but you're not doing any better. You're not doing any better. You're not doing anything to help the journalists. You're not doing anything to help this organization. You're not helping the workforce of Bell. You're not doing jack squat. So him trying to react in some sort of well-mannered way of saying it's a garbage decision and, Bell Media shouldn't be doing this. Did you do anything to retaliate against it? Or did you just funnel more money to them, expecting them to hopefully give it to their workforce? Because Bell Media got $40 million in government incentives. Do you really think that was going to funnel down to the journalists? Do you really think that Bell Media, that was already corrupted to begin with, giving all that money, do you really think it was going to trickle down towards the cameramen and the local news journalists? Or is it just a way for Bell Media to not investigate your practices, your government, your regime, and this is kind of hush money, just like all the other news organizations? And you've compromised the respected practices of what free press is supposed to be.
Our abilities to tell stories to each other of how people's lives are, stories that reflect our own communities and not, central offices in our biggest cities, is part of what binds this country together from coast to coast to coast. With incredible diversity of experiences, of geographies, we need those local voices.
Funny how he says that at the time when we had those voices appear at Ottawa. We had hundreds of people gathered from all walks of life, all different geographical locations across this nation, gathering together to fight against the mandates, to fight against the tyranny that Justin Trudeau imposed on Canadians, all walks of life. And we heard different stories, we heard different backgrounds. There was teachers, there was truckers, there was firefighters, there was restaurant owners, shopkeepers, all different walks of life gathering together. Do you think they respected them in the same way they try to respect journalists? Do you think that we got the same defense for the Freedom Convoy as he is trying to defend journalism? Which, by the way, he went and retaliated against the journalists that were covering this event. So this idea that, we gotta save the local news sites, geographical local news areas, because we're gonna lose those voices. We've already lost those voices. We've already lost it through how many years of corruption, corroding, and this corporate entity, the monopolization of our media is just absolutely just corroded any chance of local voices. And he didn't do anything. He just allowed it to happen. He allowed it to happen. And then you give them more money expecting that things are going to turn around, and they just do exactly the same practices that they're notoriously known for.
And over the past years, corporate Canada, and there are many culprits on this, have abdicated their responsibility towards the communities that they have always made very good profits off of in various ways. And they need, as a government, we have been stepping up over the past years, fighting for local journalism, fighting for investments that we can have, all the while fending off attacks from conservative.
He, as a government, has been doing due diligence to fight for local journalists. Well, considering local journalism has eroded itself down to basically social media, because a lot of these local journalists no longer have a platform to be on and are resided to go onto social media. They're reporting on Twitter, they're going, on YouTube, they're doing their own podcast shows, and yet our government is retaliating against them, against podcasters, against local journalists that are ending up going on social media because they have nowhere to turn. There's no company that's willing to take them on if they're going to investigate and tell the truth and report on key critical issues. So again, this is such a garbage response. This is such a garbage response. This is, again, they're not even like trying to slap the hand of Bell Media. They're just saying that there's a lot of corporate blame to be said about this, but I'm doing everything I can in my power to somewhat at least attempt to try to save local journalists. Meanwhile, we still have high censorship tactics. We're still railing against podcasters. We are still not allowing people to discuss critical issues, and we're retaliating against journalists. Like, we arrested David Menzies of Rebel News. We're retaliating against people that go against the grain. We're not saying jack squat about Julian Assange, one of the greatest key journalists in the world, that's still being tortured and pulverized in custody and seeking extradition. So it's such malice to stand in a hospital with Doug Ford in the ridiculous face that Doug Ford is making. He almost looks constipated at this point. I want to give him prune juice. But it's just ridiculous to be standing there and saying that, you tried everything you can. I was the one that was trying to help journalists. And then Bell Media, I gave them a bunch of money, and Bell Media did a no-no. While also retaliating against independent local voices. Like, it's almost sinister. This is kind of the ploy that the Canadian government always does. It's like, oh, we have high hopes. We say we have high hopes. The intentions are there. But then we screw people over as soon as you read into the context. Just like with C11, just like with C18 and C19 and all these censorship bills that come out, they tell you that it's, supportive of Canadian content, but then you realize that they're actually railing against Canadian content because they're not in line with the Canadian government, which they don't specifically say that. They don't specifically say in the first notion of these bills. But we know that this is all to be silenced out, to silence out the opposition, and to forcefully get all the corporate conglomerates to go onto one side, to push the mainstream narrative, the establishment-approved narrative, and be the soundboard for its viewers. And viewers are declining because they're sick of it. They're sick of the propaganda. They're sick of the manipulation. And there's just more options out there. I mean, there's this show. There's hundreds of other YouTubers and podcasters and journalists out there that people can, find their information. So I feel bad. I feel bad for people in this industry. I really do. And I know people who worked at Bell that are probably not working at Bell at this point now because of this ridiculous notion that Bell just laid them off without really any reason. But there's a lot there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot of fingers that need to be pointed. Not just at Bell, but also how the government responds to Bell, how they gave them a huge amount of money and just expected them to somehow trickle down to the workforce, which clearly does not work. Clearly does not work. You give all that money to the CEOs and they expect it to, trickle down. I think we tried that all before. And just it's symbolic on the projection of where traditional media is going and why there's so many different outlets now, why there's so many people now on the internet creating their own content. There's more accessibility, there's more options available for. So it's devastating and it's heartbreaking for the workforce because you don't want to see people getting laid off for no reason. But the main reason I covered this is because of how symbolic this all means and the state of journalism, the state of television production, the state of, the media landscape in Canada here. But also, it goes to show that this could happen anywhere. Like, the only saving grace that the American media landscape has is the fact that huge amount of advertisers are holding these networks together because they're not getting the viewership that they've had 20 years ago. They're not getting anywhere close. I mean, Tucker Carlson, when he interviewed Vladimir Putin, outbeat any of the main outlets that would get viewership throughout the year. Like, it shows how people are sick and tired of the corporate conglomeracy between that and the government, just soundboarding establishment narrative when all they want to hear is a different perspective. They want different opinions. They want different ideas. They want to hear local voices. But you, Justin Trudeau, are not fighting for that. You're just trying to shake the finger, be like the tough guy, and try to shame Bell for something that you already knew was going to happen. And that's just obviously devastating.